Hello, everybody. Welcome back
Hello.
to Worth the Listen podcast. We hope you all had a good week. For those of you that were part of the 123 million that watched the Super Bowl, we hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did, and I love the halftime show. But we are not talking pop culture today, but we are talking a very important subject, particularly for boomers, Gen Xers, and now millennials. Millennials are getting caught in this topic that we're going to talk about today, and that is the sandwich generation. And so, for those of you that don't know what that is, quick and dirty definition is that it refers to middle-aged adults, often in their 40s and 50s, that are caring for both an elderly parent or family member or loved one and their own children who are still at home. And we obviously want to cover the subject because we focus so much on midlife, and particularly midlife women. And before we get to you, Stephanie, a stat that I read this morning is that 64% of all caretakers in this sandwich generation are women. No surprise there, though. I'm not surprised by that. But even more reason why we wanted to talk about it. It's also going to be a blog series. Our guest today, Stephanie, will be part of the blog series as well. The first one will come out just a few days after this podcast. So you're going to get all sorts of fantastic information. But this is not a one and done conversation for us. This is a long-term conversation because it's an ever-changing dynamic. And there's a lot of stats that, contribute to that. So anyway, we've enlisted about 5 different types of professionals to be part of this series. And our guest today, Stephanie Chan, is one of them. So before we dive into questions, I'm just going to give a brief bio about Stephanie. So she is the founder and owner of 2 companies in the senior living industry. Her first company, which she started in 2007, Home to Home, helps seniors and families with healthcare navigation, care planning, downsizing and transitions, and care management. And then her new venture, myCareBase, offers an online marketplace of pre-screened professional caregivers to help seniors remain living safely at home, and care management tools for family caregivers to monitor and oversee that care. Fantastic idea, Stephanie. Fantastic idea. But I'm going to hand it over to Penny to dive on in and grill you.
Just to segue to what Mike was saying, I mean, what a great concept, and so relevant today because, just like Maya was saying, the boomers are getting older, the Gen Xers are getting older, and millennials are, right behind us, and we find ourselves now in the sandwich generation. I'm currently not in this position to have to take care of my parents or my husband's parents. However, I know that it's on the horizon, right? And so it's such a great, topic of discussion for people who are in midlife. But first, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your background and your journey, and just tell us a little bit about like how you got into senior care planning and maybe what you were doing beforehand that led you to that place, and then share a little bit about why you started myCareBase.
Sure. So my origin story started pre-2007. I was in a completely different career. So my background is I have a business degree and a law degree. And early on in my legal career, I realized it was not what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I realized that right when I was articling. And so I thought, okay, well, I just graduated. Maybe I should give it a shot. And I ended up with a good job inside a company as corporate counsel. But in the end, I practiced for about 9 years. And in the end, I just decided, okay, if I'm never going to pursue what I really want to do, I'll never do it. And so I started thinking about what it was that I wanted to do outside of law. And there's a whole separate story around how this idea came about. But essentially, to make a long story short, I met someone who was doing something like what I was doing, but in another city. And I just thought it was a great business helping seniors and being able to have a profitable business model. And he said, if you like it so much, why don't you do it in Vancouver? And it was that just offhand remark that made me think, oh, maybe I should think about that. And so I quit law cold turkey and jumped right into entrepreneurship. And that was back in 2007. And what I realized was I had really found my calling. Like it really felt like this was the industry I really wanted to spend my career and the rest of my life in. I really enjoyed helping people instead of companies. Um, and I really, part of what we do is even for a short chapter of someone's life, we're making a meaningful impact. And I found a lot of reward in that. So that was what I was doing before, and that's how I got into elder care.
Wow, great. That's good. And when did the idea for myCareBase come along, and why did you choose it? And that's online, right? So is it
Yeah,
based too? Is it an app as well as the online marketplace?
yeah. So my care base came about because through the 16 years of experience with helping families with healthcare navigation, transitions, it became abundantly clear that most people actually want to stay at home for as long as possible. I believe there's a solution for everyone in that there's different chapters of your life where different solutions may be more appropriate. So one solution may not be appropriate forever. But most people do want to stay in their own homes. But I saw certain flaws and gaps within the home care ecosystem as a whole in terms of how much care workers are paid, how they're treated, what customers are paying, the whole delivery model between the public system and the private system. And so I saw maybe a way to provide a model that is a little bit different and allows for better clarity and visibility by the family and control. And also allows, most importantly, allows care workers to earn a sustainable living out of home care. Um, and so that was how myCareBase came about, and it's an integrated platform that has a marketplace where you can search and find and hire caregivers, and a care management app so that you can monitor that care and you can delegate tasks to different people. So it's a care management app.
Wow.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's so streamlined.
Yeah.
And I feel like, it's so important because to me, from what I read, it just seems like a very fragmented, sort of enfranchised industry
Yeah.
that's vital to every human that's going to, get older,
Yeah.
right,
Well,
and needs care.
and I also think that, for people like myself who don't really know much about this topic yet, it's a great place to start because you can see who is in your backyard, who is providing specific, you know,
Right.
um, services for whatever needs you might have. So can you discuss like what are some of the typical, because you're connecting, the patient with the caregiver, um, and what are some of the most, typical things that you have on like services that you provide on at home care or my
So
care?
when someone starts with home care, and barring any unexpected events like someone had a stroke, someone had a fall and broke their hip, but just in the natural course of aging, typically people start light, because you're dealing with a little bit of resistance early on. And early on, maybe that person doesn't need a lot of help. So cleaning would be probably the most common thing to start with, and meal prep.
Mm.
Those are the two things I would say a lot of seniors lose the not the ability, but just some energy around doing those things. Um, putting a load of laundry through all the house chores, grocery shopping, cleaning, and making a meal and cleaning up after that. Um, and so those two are the most common tasks. And then as you kind of go through the aging spectrum, then you get into maybe some more involved personal care. And so things like helping someone get dressed, making sure they're taking their meds. That's a big one because short-term memory sometimes starts to slide a little bit. And families commonly start worrying about, is my parent taking their meds on time? So medication reminders, um, assistance, either standby assistance or hands-on assistance with showering, bathing, washing their hair, drying their hair. So all sorts of personal care. And then at the um, more advanced side of the spectrum, you've got things like incontinence care, transfers for people who aren't able to get out of bed themselves, and that more involved kind of care.
Do you also provide on your app services for like driving people around, to go run errands or to go to doctor's appointments, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So generally, whoever you use for your service provider to find caregivers, it's up to the customer the customer has complete flexibility to kind of state what their requirements are. So absolutely, you can ask for someone who drives to help take your parent on outings, to appointments, to recreation, whatever you'd like. You can also ask for someone with language skills.
Mhm.
Sometimes a parent in their older years prefer going back to their first language if English wasn't their first language. And so sometimes people ask for caregivers who have that language skill.
Wow.
So do when should an adult child, I guess, start to have this conversation with their parent or their elderly relative or loved one that, they sort of know they're going to be the one responsible for caring with them, for caring for them. And if that person is putting up objection to the conversation, what
Yeah.
are some of your suggestions for getting them to not feel like it's this sort of doom and gloom, like end of life
Yeah.
conversation?
Yeah. So a couple of tips. Start the conversation early before any decisions have to be made. So really early, and frame it as a question of conversation, not that any decision has to be made. Maybe bring up a friend who is going, make up a situation where a friend is going through something. And so you can start the conversation with, oh, I've got a coworker or a friend, they're going through this. If this were happened to us, what would you want, Mom? Like,
Mhm.
what do you think, Mom? And so bring it from an external situation to internal, ask for their opinion. I think you always want to ask what they think about something, as opposed to telling them what is best for them.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you're dealing with resistance, giving choices is also very good. And so even if you want to try to drive them to a certain outcome, give them a choice, because um, one of the things we see often, time and time again, is that the parent, the senior, is so scared of losing their independence that all they want to do is keep control of their decisions.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's understandable.
I think
And so giving them choice makes them feel that way.
Yeah, no, I love that.
It's yeah.
Yeah, I think that is key, is to, because they don't want to feel like, like they have no say so in the matter, or that they're not capable of making decisions. So I think that
Yeah.
that's really genius. I actually purchased, I was telling my a long-term care policy for my mother when I was in my 30s. Maybe I was even in my late 20s. And I don't, at the time, her friend suggested it as something for her. And I was like, sure, Mom, I'll do this for you. But, I don't know, like, if I did it too early, or if there's such a thing as doing it too early. At what age does your parent need to be if you're looking to, supplement their long-term care, or, get something for them for this exact sort of thing that we're talking about?
And can I also add on to that? Why are so few people doing it? I read a statistic that like only 12% of elderly adults have a long-term care plan, insurance plan.
Yeah.
That seems
Mhm.
awfully, awfully low.
Mm,
So I guess, what is it also part of that? I just don't want to deal with aging.
mm,
Maybe. Well, I think also, I don't know how well marketed those plans are, so maybe some of them don't know about it
Mhm.
or don't know enough about it.
mhm.
I also think people are just naturally, for any insurance in general, any type of insurance, people have a natural tendency to avoid it. When you look at other forms of insurance, there's lots of people um, that should be getting the insurance that don't, whether it be pet insurance, health insurance, whatever. Um, the thing about long-term care insurance is, once you get into the details, they might think, I would imagine they might think, I don't need this. I'm just going to just store away my money and I'll just fund it myself. I'm not going to pay someone else for it. Um, so there's that as well. But of course, you're paying the premiums that you pay are only a fraction of what your monthly payouts would be once it's triggered. So in many cases, it is worth it for sure.
I hope
In
so.
fact, in Canada, when the insurers here first introduced it, it was widely marketed and promoted, and then all the insurers had to redefine the product a little bit because they were finding that they underestimated the all the payouts versus what they were charging for premiums. And so they had to really change the product
Yeah.
um, because they were paying these large monthly amounts out.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's it's interesting that you make the comment about like, people and their choices of what insurance they get, how much insurance they get, because I do think that there is a nature for some people to be insurance adverse. And I will say this about, I don't want to go into too much detail about my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, but one of the things that she always says to me is, Bob must have known. Like we were so anti-insurance, but he demanded that I get long-term insurance plan for him, and then he was diagnosed with dementia. And then that lasts for years and years. And she's like, I don't know. And they both had incredible careers, great, like, financially steady people, and yet getting a diagnosis like that, I mean, I think that's also one of those things people need to consider is we would all love to just age normal, like without any ailments, right? And die of old age.
Yeah.
But the reality is most of us aren't going to die of just old age. There's going to be some sort of medical
Something. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
well, and I think we think about our age, being in our 50s, it's like, should we even consider getting it now, or do we wait a little bit longer? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is in terms of long-term care insurance.
Yeah. Keep in contact with your insurance provider, the agent, and just get quotes for the premium every couple of years and just see how the premiums are going up.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
So I have
Eye on it.
another quick question for you about, I think a lot of people would think that wills are a way to maybe, plan better for their children and such. But how do you, I guess, let's say, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but how do you get them to sort of create almost like a will, but for their, when they get older to,
Well, yeah,
it's like almost like a plan,
like, yes,
for, when your father dies, or if your mother dies first, this is what's gonna, this is
what are their desires?
Right. Like,
Yeah,
how do
that's a great question.
Yeah.
So that falls into kind of the broad term of what I call advanced planning. So under the category of advanced planning, there's incapacity planning, which is thinking about what your wishes would be and who your substitute decision makers would be if you became ever unable to make those decisions for yourself. And then there's also wills and estates planning, which is planning for how your assets will be handled after you pass away. So one is about you're still alive. What do you want your life to look like? Who do you want making decisions for you while you're still alive? And the other side of it is, okay, after you pass away, how do you want your assets divided? And how do you want your family to be treated?
Yeah.
So on the first subject, there are several tools that I would recommend people look into, talk to their lawyers about, talk to their families about. The first is a power of attorney. And this is appointing someone to make legal and financial decisions for you. And that could encompass everything to do with maintaining your house. Let's say you are someone who wants to stay at home for your current home for as long as possible. But as someone experiences cognitive decline, your ability to pay bills on time, handle house maintenance, cook, clean, get home services, your ability to manage all that declines as well. So that's when a power of attorney would step in. Usually it's one of your kids, but it doesn't have to be. Your power of attorney can be anyone. So if you don't have kids, it can be a friend, it could be your godchildren, it can even be a complete third party like a lawyer or a trust officer. But they're basically managing your affairs to allow you to stay in that home of your choice. And so they're hiring the gardener, they're making sure you have groceries, they're making sure all your utilities are paid on time, etc. The other part of incapacity planning is, okay, who's going to make my personal healthcare decisions for me? And the substitute decision maker in that regard might go to appointments with you, to your doctors or specialists. If you're ever hospitalized, they would be the ones talking to the medical team at the hospital. So there's that side of it as well. And a lot of people they decide to choose the same person. So it streamlines, like one of your kids are appointed as both. So it really streamlines the decision making. Some people say, well, that's a lot to place on one child. Maybe I'll appoint one to make my financial decisions and one to make my healthcare decisions. In which case, my advice would be make sure they get along really well, because there is an intersection of, when you're talking about private pay care, private seniors housing, whether mom or dad should move. Those have care elements and cost elements. And so if they disagree, I've seen cases where the parent is just idling and deteriorating and no decisions being made because the kids can't agree.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I mean,
so okay, let's backtrack then a little bit. As the I'm okay, let's you and I, or for example, I'm 51. We have 3 children, 26, 20, and 19. And we want to now have this conversation with them. What is your advice on ensuring that when this time comes, you're going to get them all kumbayaing together and handling this as a unified front, especially if there's already sort of a dynamic in the family where the kids aren't that friendly with each other, or you have a blended family.
It's almost like you need a mediator for the mediators.
For the mediators,
Yeah. Well, your kids are at a stage where maybe you're not sure where they're going to end up. So that brings me to another point, is how do you choose who the right person is? So some things you want to think about is, ideally, but it's not a necessity, they should live close to you, because a lot of the tasks involved in being a power of attorney are a little bit hands-on. It makes it easier if they're close to the senior, the parent. So ideally, all things equal, you want to choose someone who's close to you and has the skill set to do the job. When a power of attorney is triggered, it is like a part-time job. So when your kids get older and you start seeing how their lives are going to evolve, I would say, okay, who has really good multitasking skills? Who can handle stress? Who copes with stress the best? Who would make the decisions that's most aligned with you? Because it would be impossible to go over every scenario with them in advance. There's going to be scenarios where you're going to have to trust that they make the decision the way that you would want. And so, not knowing anything else about your kids, I would say choose the one where they're likely going to have the same judgment as you. And
it's fascinating that you're saying this, because I'm going to get on the phone with my mother after this. They've chosen my brother, who lives the farthest away from them. I would say of all of the children, I handle stress better than any of them. We may have to revisit this conversation. Mom, if you're listening, we're revisiting. I mean, I think at some point there was this conversation, and again, it's conversation, that when the time comes, my brother would move back home, I think he's kind of always wanted to move back to where we grew up. So he has to be prepared.
I was going to say, maybe he expressed that to them.
Yeah, exactly. So, but those are important conversations.
Yeah. And I mean, you bring up such great suggestions. Are all of these resources available on your websites somewhere?
Yes, I'll send you the link so you can broadcast it. So I do have links for like a senior planning guide, which talks about the financial aspects of budgeting and planning for the care, as well as explains the terminology, gives tips, and so forth. I'll send
We
that
will
to
put
you.
all of your links and contact information in the blog series as well. So for those people that are listening now and you're driving and you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I could write all of this down.
Yeah.
Don't
Like
worry.
me.
Like Penny is writing feverishly.
I know, I'm
She's
like in
asking
the class.
questions.
I'm like,
I know, but it's really such vital information.
Yeah.
And I will say this, we've already written, we did a whole series at the beginning of the year. It was a New Year, New You series. And we chose 4 areas of life. And one of them is on life and financial planning. And it does refer to a lot of what you were just saying about, 2 distinct power of attorney responsibilities. Could be the same person, could be 2 different people.
Yeah.
But
Right.
access that information there.
And
as well.
so that information, the power of attorney suggestions are on your site as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I'll send you the links.
that's
Thank
great
you.
news for all of us.
I know, you're a lifesaver.
I have another question. So you talking about, choosing a power of attorney that lives close to you. And what happens when, because that's a kind of a complicated situation for some families, that don't live near one another. What do you find works best in that situation? Is it a relocation conversation, or how easy is it to find care that locally for that person if they don't have family around?
It's not an absolute necessity. It just makes things easier for the person who's the power of attorney. So it's really up to them and their commitment to do things remotely. If someone is a power of attorney who lives in a different city, I would recommend finding like a neighbor or a friend, a local kind of, to be your local eyes and ears. Because there'll be times that you need to check mom's mail. How are you going to do that if you don't live in the same city? Now we live in a world these days where most bills can be paid online, so that's helpful. You can hire and research services online, so that's really helpful. So that's why it's not a deal breaker. I think it really depends on, is that person who lives far away the type that can handle the long distance management of the care? I think that's more important.
Yeah.
All right. Now, okay, let's talk about like when you have to make the difficult decision. And maybe it's not a difficult decision if you've actually had the conversation, like when I get to this point, it's time for me to move in with you or put me in a facility a mile down the street from where you live. How does a family or the adult that's going to be the caretaker, what are your suggestions for them in preparing for that very, important transition and it's a life-changing transition.
Yeah. So there's 2 transitions you talked about. One scenario is parent moves in with one of their kids, and the other scenario is moving into maybe a retirement community or a care facility, care home. So both are huge transitions. I always start with, what does the parent want? That's always the starting point. But assuming in each scenario that this is what they want, let's take the first one first, where they're moving in with one of the family members. I would say in those situations, the one thing to keep in mind is just because your parent lives with you doesn't mean you have to do everything.
Yeah.
Just because your parent's moving in with you doesn't mean you're responsible for everything all of a sudden.
Say
So
that 10 times in a row.
yeah.
64% of these people are women, and our nature is to just take all of the
because it's faster and easier for us to do it than to ask someone else to do it, right? But it's important, if your parent is living with you, to set boundaries and set expectations up front. So if you are in a situation where you have siblings, you're not an only child, tell your siblings, this is what I'm prepared to do. It does not mean I am going to do everything. Let's talk about, after mom or dad move in, what you guys can do to help. And that could be, someone can be responsible for all medical appointments, right? Not you. Someone could be responsible for, a certain day of the week, take mom or dad out. It could be all sorts of different things. If there's a sibling who can't do anything because they live far away, Is there something they can do remotely? Can they contribute to the additional costs, perhaps?
Right.
Because there's always a financial aspect of caregiving as well.
Yeah.
And then I'm only bringing this up because a friend of mine just went through this very scenario I'm going to put out here. Can they be prepared to step in a medical emergency? Because, okay, I'm gonna bear the responsibility on day to day, but if there is a true medical emergency and I need all reinforcements, are you
going to
brothers and sisters ready to get on a plane or hop in a car and come help? Right?
Exactly. That's a great point. In
Yeah.
those cases, you need kind of all hands on deck to um, navigate the hospital system and provide support.
And I think there's also like, I love what you said about the expectations too, because I think about another conversation I had just a few weeks ago. And this was actually the grandmother got chastised by her daughter for parenting her kid. And she was like,
Mm,
never talk to her like that. So like, how do you tell your
mm,
mom, or like, you can't be mom too? Like there's, I'm the mother, right? But then like, you're also caring for your mother. It's just a interesting dynamic.
or your mother.
yeah,
Your mother-in-law, exactly. Mhm.
I mean,
I can. Yeah,
it's like so many complicated,
Nuances.
and really, I mean, it's unique to every person, right? So, because you
yeah,
know what you're going to get,
yeah. It helps also if they have their own space. Like I know that's not always possible depending on someone's living quarters, whether if your parent moves in with you, whether they can have a basement suite, for example. But having like a separation of space, I think helps with the family dynamics. Also, a lot of family caregivers, the adult children need to be told it's okay to say no.
Mhm.
Just
Yeah.
because it's your mom or dad doesn't mean you need to say yes all the time.
yeah.
Great points. Okay, then on the flip side of that, how do you prepare your children? And then how do you make them feel involved in the transition, but also not burdened or, you know, um, setting them up for feelings of resentment?
Hmm. So, the interpersonal dynamics of a family, of course, are all unique in every case. I would say, just as a general tip, if it's a really great opportunity for the grandchild and the grandparent to bond, because I think that's such a special relationship. It's a very different child to grandparent than child to parent. And so, don't make spending time with a grandparent seem like a chore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Ask the child what they would like to do. Um, Allow them to do something fun with the grandparent as opposed to like doing laundry, cleaning their room. Don't make it seem like a chore. Make it enjoyable. Or you can make it so that they're helping around the house and helping you. Because part of what hopefully you'll get support on from your family is they're chipping into the house chores to give you a break. So maybe you have a teenage daughter who loves cooking, it's a hobby to her, have her make dinner once a week. She doesn't even realize she's helping out. She's doing what she enjoys.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because my daughter can't even boil water, so her parents would be screwed. No,
Well,
Sophia, I love you, but it's the reality.
I
But
love that
great
you bring
points.
up that it's an opportunity for bonding.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't have that nuclear home living situation where it's like grandparents, three generations under one
Mhm.
roof. But
Mhm.
I think in this case, you sort of, initially anyway, you should embrace it as an opportunity to bond and to for the kids to learn things from their elders and vice versa, right? And just to really try to have fun with it. I mean, because if
Yeah.
it's going to have to
Right.
happen, you kind of have to just, like I know that if we ever, I would love it if my mom had to come live with us, only because selfishly I love her cooking, but I also think that my children would love it as
Mhm.
well. So I think that just like you said, it's unique to every family.
Yeah.
Saying it's going to all be
Yeah.
rainbows and roses for everybody.
Well, and it depends on what you're
Yeah.
dealing with too. I mean, if you're
Right.
just dealing with an aging adult,
Right.
or parent or loved one,
That's a good, yeah.
it's different than if you're dealing with a parent that has Alzheimer's, right?
Mm.
Or ALS or MS,
Yeah.
or what, my grandmother had MS, and while she didn't live with us, she lived down the street from us. And my father really bared the burden of care and
Mhm.
making sure that she was also getting the care she deserved in the facility that she was
Yeah.
in. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's no one size fits all, I guess.
Totally. And even if your parent lives with you, don't be scared to consider hiring outside help. Again, this goes back to like this notion of don't feel like you have to do everything. You don't. You're doing a lot by just allowing them in your house to live with you and sharing your living space. But if you work, if you have kids that are in school and you're driving them everywhere, and your parent can't really be home alone for long periods, hire someone to come for that respite care, so that your parent isn't alone, that they get some stimulation, they get socialization with someone outside the family.
I was actually
That's
going to
important too.
if your app had companion services, just just come and hang out,
Hang
and
out.
talk to them, watch a television show with them, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you have families that, you've encountered over the years, that have done like family therapy to prepare for this transition,
Mhm.
either prior to, or because again, like you got a fiery family with all sorts of
Yeah.
personalities. Is there like, would a therapy be a good thing to maybe think about before it happens, and then
Or
certainly if
during.
there's a rift after
Yeah.
the move-in, after it happens?
Yeah.
That's a great idea. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't heard of that, but that would be a great idea. And if you work for a company that has a good employee assistance program, often they have counselors
Yes.
that can help with all sorts of things. So maybe look to there.
government
Um,
government jobs, they all have, like, I think about my brother who lives in California, and even my husband, like they have access to so many resources, especially when it comes to family, bonding, mental health,
Yeah.
all of those. So again, I think it's just peel back the layers and find out what maybe even free resources are there for you.
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
that's a good point around the mental health topic, because more and more today you just see that the mental health crises is sort of on the rise, and so I think it's something definitely that could be a resource for
Yeah.
people in terms of finding family therapy that can come talk to everyone at the same time. I think that's a great idea
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
sure.
Yeah. So outside of therapy, because I think we talked about this a little bit before in our first conversation. What are some other ways that you recommend or that you've seen for the adult caretaker to feel less isolated, to feel less, like they're putting out, a 5 alarm fire, like 24/7, and just trying to keep their faculties about them?
yeah. I would say important for any, if you're the primary family caregiver, whether your parent is living with you or not, actually, I would say it's really important to put self-care first. A lot of people talk about this, but it's not really practiced a lot because as caregivers, we put ourselves last.
Mhm.
And so I would recommend just making sure you put priority on, and don't feel guilty about putting priority on yourself and the things you enjoy doing. So if you play tennis once a week, if you do Pilates once a week, if you go out with girlfriends, whatever it is that you enjoy, if your career is skyrocketing, whatever you want to put as priority, you should keep it there. Don't let the caregiving um, take over. But do what you can to expand your support group, your support team, so that the caregiving also gets fulfilled, as well as your other priorities. But self-care is so important, and taking breaks so that you don't get burnt out, because you're no good to others
You're
if you
exactly
get
right.
burnt out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're exactly right. And I
Self-care is
think,
important.
again, I think about 64% of these caregivers are women, where we're not good at putting ourselves first. We're not good at, providing our own self-care.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you just said that, because again, we just published a blog today that Penny wrote about like whole health wellness. Like these are the things that we can all be doing to make ourselves feel better. But when you said, don't stop doing the things that you enjoy,
Mhm.
it made me think about when you have a baby. Like I remember, like probably the best advice that
Yeah.
I got when I was pregnant with my daughter from people that had kids that were well older, was like, don't stop having a social life.
Yeah.
Don't stop having date nights.
Yeah.
Don't stop, like. And so we used to call Sophia the to-go baby, because we would take her to every party we went to. We would open that pack and play and put her in there.
Yeah.
But you know, she got socialized very
Yeah.
young by doing that, and we felt like we weren't losing our vitality.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important
Well,
to think
and
about.
I think another layer to that is what you touched on earlier, Stephanie, about you don't have to do everything, right?
Yeah.
And I think that as long as you're delegating some of that and you know, allowing yourself to carve some time out for yourself, I think that's key, right? It's all of
Yeah.
this so that you don't lose your marbles. So
Yeah.
I have a
Absolutely.
question about family, the dynamic itself. So we talk about like getting ready for the transition and getting them in there, whoever it is that you're taking care of, and it could be both parents. I mean, it could be two parents or two elderly people in your life. How do you, or what do you recommend in making sure that the transit, the daily dynamic, the daily routine, because it's going to be upended. I mean, essentially,
Yeah.
how that can happen seamlessly, and
Mhm.
it's bringing people, that new nuclear in the house, together as opposed to opposing.
Yeah. I would say it all comes out to these pre-conversations you have. So have a lot of conversations and discussions before they actually move in to set expectations. And so every family is different. People who have kids have different levels of activities that the kids are in. So if you're not a family that eats together at the dinner table every night because so and so has soccer, so and so has swimming, whatever, then, for example, you might want to tell your parent, we don't sit down at dinner every night together, but always make sure there's food in the fridge. So you eat whenever you want. That might be one conversation. Another one might be around, asking the kids, okay, what free days do you have? And here are the days that you can take grandma or grandpa out. It's all around just setting expectations. Um, also depending on who you've got in the family who works full time outside the house. Again, there'll be times when no one is home other than the parent, other than the senior, right? So they have to know, okay, you're in my house, but from 8 to 5, you're actually going to be alone all day. Are you okay with that? And it really comes down to what they want. So having all these conversations allows you to really suss out, okay, do you really want to move in with us?
right.
Or do you want to consider retirement community? Because we haven't talked much about retirement communities this hour. One of the key underrated things I always think people don't value enough is the socialization and how it affects your overall well-being. And it's something that you don't experience the benefits of until you actually are in that community. Excuse me. So in that conversation, when you're having with your parent about, okay, you can either move in with us or we can consider retirement community, perhaps to evaluate both alternatives, they can go for a tour or a trial stay in one of these communities to really decide, okay, what does staying in my daughter's home alone all day feel like? But there's benefits to being close to family for sure and close to grandkids. And here's what living in a retirement community feels like. Opportunity to make friends, new friends. For some people, it could be really scary. But you don't have to, we see a lot where people actually don't want to move in with their kids for whatever reason. They actually want to remain independent and have their own, feel like they have their own home.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to really what the parent wants.
Yeah.
But I would say give them a choice so that they're making an informed decision.
Do retirement homes amongst elderly people, do they get a bad rap? I mean, is it generally seen favorably or unfavorably in most people's eyes? I don't know.
I think that's a really good question. And so like it's got complexities within it. So retirement homes have different levels of care, and there's different types of seniors residences based on what type of care they provide. On the more independent side of the spectrum, where it's almost like a resort with dining, recreation, housekeeping. I think the thoughts and perceptions around those are generally favorable
Mhm.
because it is like being on a perpetual cruise ship. Really, it is. I could move in to one of them.
Haven't you heard about this whole trend now too, where people are opting to like go into a retirement community and literally
Yeah.
like cruising the world for 3 years because it's
Yeah.
cheap. It's literally like cost analysis. It's cheap
Yep.
and they get to see the world.
Yep.
Like on an actual cruise ship?
Like a actual cruise
They
ship.
live on the cruise ship.
On the cruise ship.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I could see
I think
myself.
it's amazing too. I have heard of that.
Can I start
Um,
looking into that
Now,
now?
I
So
oh,
yeah,
I
you know,
would be like, you need to have a retirement plan people can pay into.
seriously.
yeah.
That's
And so what were we talking about? So
a retirement.
uh
They are
the communities. Oh, I think yeah, I think the independent ones are very nice. I feel like some of them, especially the newer ones, every new build gets better and better. And so I feel like I could move into them. Like that's how nice they are. I think there's a lot of negativity, and some of them are myths around the later stage, kind of the higher care homes. People call them nursing homes, care facilities. I think there's more negativity around that because the living environment is different. Some of those seem institutional because of the level of care they provide. And also, I think our parents might, some of them remember caring for their own parent who was in a nursing home and not realizing things have changed in 40 years. And they think that they're going to have to move into a place remembering what their own parent was in. But those places are no longer like that.
Yeah. Do you also think COVID had something to do with the fear that I feel like there's this sort of new bubbling like trend of fear, which I think is also why we're sort of talking about the sandwich generation, where people are like, did you see how many people died in those nursing homes and how many not just the elderly people that died in nursing homes due to COVID, but the caregivers that died because they're around, they're helping, they're caring for aging, sick,
Yeah.
elderly people. And so it was like, oh, that's not going to happen. And now people are like, I don't care what happens, you're moving in with me.
Yeah.
Do you think that has a
Yeah.
factor in sort of how this is trending up again?
Yeah, definitely. I think COVID had a huge impact on the senior living industry. Think of what it brought out actually was that a lot of these care homes were not able to handle the higher sanitation and cleanliness standards. And the ones that were just on the cusp of, or maybe below, operating below licensing standards, really got called out because it readily became apparent that they weren't following sanitation and cleanliness practices like they should, or staffing levels weren't supposed to be what they're at a level they're supposed to be at. But the well-run seniors residences, at least where I live, saw very little incidents of COVID outbreaks. It really caused a distinction between the well-run ones and the ones that had the ability to adapt versus the ones that were on such a tight budget to begin with that it was really hard for them to adapt.
Yeah.
So if I'm a child who is considering or needs to, it could be considering or needs to put my parent into one of those advanced facilities that would be more classified as a nursing home, what are the most important factors I need to consider? And like, what are the 3 most important questions I need to ask off the bat to feel a sense of security for my parent?
Yeah. The first is I would go on a tour. There's only so much you can see online and ask over the phone. You need to see the place in person. The second is I would ask about staffing levels. So different care homes have different, I'll say configurations. So some are like the ones that I like, they do it in neighborhoods. So to reduce the sense of being in an institution or like a glorified hospital, they make it homey as possible by grouping people in smaller groups and creating a neighborhood. So every neighborhood within this building has its own living room, has its own dining room, they have lounges. And so it's a little bit more, you take a building of 200 people, but rather than feeling like you're in this huge community, you're in a neighborhood within that community.
That's a fantastic.
There's some really progressive models right now where um, in the Netherlands, if you benchmark like what other countries are doing, and we just actually a few years ago opened one up here in BC. It's called a dementia village. And so it's making people with dementia feel like they can still leave their home and wander. So they've created a gated community, very, very secure. And the whole community is a care home. And so they have cafes, they have little houses where people feel like it's their own house and they can wander the whole community. They have a clubhouse, a restaurant, and everything. They can wander the whole community and be safe as opposed to being in just one building
That's
Right.
awesome.
the whole time. It's really neat.
Yeah.
Is there are there instances where you can maybe they try it for like 30 days? I mean, do they
Yeah.
have, is that sort of a normal practice?
Yeah.
Just to make sure it's a good fit. I mean, I'm guessing that that's
Yes, and you can
probably
get
something.
evicted too.
Oh, well.
You can get evicted.
Yeah.
No, like, and I use the word evicted, but if
you're
you're if you're not adjusting
Mm,
and you're causing
Yeah.
more of disturbance,
mm.
your caretaker might be scrambling to find you another.
Yeah.
Happens.
So a couple of points there. So on the first question, yes, you can do a trial stay. They're more common on the, we talked about the spectrum of seniors residences on the more independent side, the ones that feel like resorts with minimal care. They do trial stays. And so I actually highly recommend it because it's really a good way to immerse the parent to give them like a sense of like, I am really making an informed decision. So I just say, pack a suitcase, make it feel like a vacation,
Mhm.
right? Then on the other question of in what circumstances would you get evicted, it's really around whether the home can continue to provide the care that the person needs. And so often with dementia, behavioral issues start to happen, or they need round-the-clock supervision in a way that maybe that seniors residents cannot provide because they're at a lower category of care. And so something to plan for is if your parent has a condition that is going to evolve, Alzheimer's, another form of dementia, Parkinson's, MS, it could be a number of things where eventually they're going to need a higher level of care. That's something to keep in mind. And so there are communities where all the levels of care are provided as someone evolves through their aging. But there are many seniors residences that only offer up to a limited amount of care. And after that, you need to move to a different community.
Mhm. And again, that would be another great question to ask, right? It's
Yeah.
like, what's my time frame here?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that less disturbance for the adult that's needs the care,
Yeah.
and then the child or the family member that has to make those decisions for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because no one wants to move multiple times. And so this concept of aging in place is important because it's really around minimal disruption.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I could talk to you all day long, seriously. Like this here, and again, so for our audience, we will have Stephanie back. She is contributing to the blog series. We will put all of her contact information on our site. But before we wrap up, is there anything else you want? Is there anything we didn't cover that you think is so important for people to know?
Yeah.
I think what I'll end with is my key advice because every case is so different. If I could generalize, what I encourage everyone to do is be proactive. And by even thinking about these issues, you're being proactive. By talking to your parent early about what they would want, you're being proactive. So be proactive in any way you feel comfortable, and you'll be better prepared for unexpected events.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you because I know just from what you just said, I'm definitely going to go speak to my parents about this
Yeah.
in the next couple of weeks and try to find, the right frame of, how to frame it so that they don't feel, like
Right.
Mhm.
averse to the
Well, and in my
conversation.
situation, and I know that why my parents did this, they don't like to burden people. My parents are like the least burdensome people you'll ever come across.
Yeah.
So they, they basically said to my brother, "You're handling all of this." But now that I'm getting older, it's like I want to be roped into this conversation too, though. And I am actually the one that lives the closest to them. So yeah, I'm still,
Yeah.
a 2-hour flight away, but
Mhm.
I'm still I'm not on the other side of
Yeah.
that. So I think, also as the other sibling, it might be advocate to be included in the conversation if you feel like you could be valued.
Yeah. And they could have easily appointed both of you. That's the other thing is it doesn't need to be you or your brother. It can be both of you, each one having the power to act individually. Don't make it joint decisions, but just maybe ask them to add you.
But I'll do.
Yeah.
I'll
I think that's a
entice
good
my
plan.
mother to her favorite restaurant. Mom, I'll take you to Greg's, but you got to include me. Anyway, Stephanie, thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Thank
This
you,
was
Stephanie.
wonderful.
You're
We
welcome.
So
having you,
enlightening and
very
informative
enlightening, yeah.
and
And really like more inspiring than I feel like, again, like I feel like, I'm ready to be proactive.
Yes.
You've given great information on how to be proactive, and we
Agreed.
can reframe the conversation where it's a positive thing for everybody,
Yeah.
and not, a mode of depression.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today.
absolutely.
Talk to you soon.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye.